Hi, I'm Jenny Kaufman, one of the pastors here at First United Methodist Church in Oak Ridge, and I'm so grateful that you have decided to tune in for our Sunday school lesson for this day. What I've been thinking about, and so many people as we think about this whole COVID-19 experience and everything that has happened, many people, especially pastors probably, have associated this experience to a time in the wilderness. When one thinks of the wilderness, what is it about a wilderness experience that is challenging? Well, it's wild, it's untamed. And what that means is we are facing situations and terrain and things that where we don't know what to expect and that we cannot really plan for what might happen. We've lost many of our creaturely comforts. We're very far outside of civilization when we're living in the wilderness. And it can be harsh, it can be cold, and we have to deal with the elements of the weather. It's just usually not an easy time. Often there are no well-marked paths or roads, and so we're wandering not sure of our destination and just what we're going to encounter along the way. And lastly, in the wilderness, often food and drink are not readily available. So what we don't carry with us, we may be without. So I'd ask you to think about, with this time of pandemic and social isolation, does the image, the metaphor of wilderness work for you, speak to you at all? And if so, in what ways is this experience like a wilderness experience? When we Christians think about wilderness experiences, there are usually two pieces of scripture that come to mind. The first is Jesus's experience in the wilderness right after he had been baptized, and he went out for 40 days and he fasted, and then he was tempted by the devil, tempted in three ways. One, he was encouraged to turn a stone into bread because he was hungry. He was tempted by the idea of power, told that he could have power over everything that he could see from the high place. And then lastly, he was tempted to test God, to show God, to ask God to prove that, yes, I am loved. You will love me. You will protect me. You will not let anything bad happen to me. So those are ways in the New Testament that we think of wilderness and what happens. In the Old Testament, and those of you that know me well, one of my favorite books in the Bible is the book of Exodus, which is all about the children of Israel and their experience of wandering in the desert, in the wilderness, for a very long time. We are told 40 years. 40 years in the Bible, we don't know if it's actually 40 years, but it can be used to just mean a very, very long time. So during that Exodus, the children of Israel are called out of the slavery that they've been experiencing in Egypt and are called to travel through the wilderness, as I said, for a very long time, moving toward the promised land. And while they're there are repeated assurances of God's goodness, and God is guiding them with the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. And yet what we read over and over again is how quickly the children of Israel go from gratitude to grumbling. You know, they get what they need, and then they're like, oh, we would have been left better just to die in Egypt. So it is just such a wonderful depiction of human nature. You know, most of us, it doesn't take long for us to go from gratitude to grumbling. No matter what God gives us, no matter how strongly we feel the presence of God and the grace of God with us, it usually, sadly, doesn't take long when things don't go our way for us to move to doubting God, doubting what God will and can do for us, and to complaining. When we think of the story of Exodus, the story starts with so many miracles. We have the miracles that happen during the plagues and how the Egyptians are affected by this, but the children of Israel are not. And perhaps the most dramatic of these miracles is towards the end of their escape from Egypt, when we see the parting of the Red Sea and how the children of Israel can go forth on dry ground, while the poor people from Egypt do not have such a good fate. And as these miraculous and dramatic things is, what is it that they do at the end? They celebrate, they sing, and they dance. And yet it doesn't take long for them to shift. So hear now these words from chapter 15 from the book of Exodus, starting with verse 19. When the horses of Pharaoh with his chariots and his chariot drivers went into the sea, the Lord brought back the waters of the sea upon them. But the Israelites walked through the sea on dry ground. Then the prophet Miriam, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women went out after her with tambourines and with dancing. And Miriam sang to them, "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and rider he has thrown into the sea." Then Moses ordered Israel to set out from the Red Sea, and they went into the wilderness of Shur. They went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter. That is why it was called Marah. And the people complained against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" He cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. There the Lord made for them a statute and an ordinance, and there he put them to the test. He said, "If you will listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God, and do what is right in his sight, and give heed to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will not bring upon you any of the diseases that I brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you." Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they camped there by the water. So this is the end of chapter 15, and yet listen to what we hear just in the very next chapter, starting with verse 2. The whole congregation of the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots and ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." Then what happens? What does the Lord do? Then the Lord said to Moses, "I am going to rain bread from heaven for you, and each day the people shall go out and gather enough for that day. In that way I will test them, whether they will follow my instruction or not." We have here the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So what we have here is the story of how the children of Israel are given manna, bread from heaven, while they are the whole time that they are in the wilderness, these 40 years. But what happens? They complain again. They ask for water, which Moses gets for them by striking the rock with his staff. Then they ask for meat. They keep asking for things. As I said, what I love about Exodus is it just shows human nature. How we so often, if we don't get just what we want, we don't believe and trust and have faith, but instead we whine, we complain, we blame God, and we wonder, why isn't God taking care of us? When you know what? God is taking care of us. God is taking care of us, but not always in the ways that we want. And that's not easy. That's not easy. God gives us manna, but we want meat. God guides us, but not where or how we want to go. God gives us rules to live by, such as the 10 Commandments, which also come from Exodus. But you know what? So often we would rather live by our own rules. We would rather worship our own gods, just as the children of Israel chose to worship the gods that were popular in Egypt, where they had been in slavery, and thus they worshiped the golden calf. And it's important to be honest and just to recognize these are our nature and these are our challenges, and to ask God for help to and to not give in to the temptations, just as Jesus in his time in the wilderness and desert did not give in. Now, I don't want to make light of this experience that we are all going through. COVID-19 is, and everything that has done is not easy for us. Many people have lost people very dear to them, and that pain is real. And so it's not surprising that many of us are struggling right now. I know that my mood goes up and down in ways that, frankly, I have found at times kind of astounding. This is a very uncertain time. We are cut off from so much of what gives us pleasure and meaning in life, and those things that help us to cope day to day. Our family and friends, our church family, our regular routines, and even the opportunity to worship and serve God in ways that we enjoy doing. We're cut off from our routines and from the structure that many of us rely on. And we are confronted by something that we cannot see, that we do not understand. And so we don't know what the right decisions are. We are very uncertain, and for many of us, this is very scary because the stakes are pretty high. So it's not surprising that we are struggling and having a hard time. But what's good is, in addition to Exodus, the message and the lessons from Exodus, it's not just about human nature and what we struggle with. There's another really important lesson that I would like to bring out. Who was it that was able to lead the children of Israel through the desert wilderness, even though he himself did not know where he was going? Who was it who led them? Yes, it was Moses. And what did Moses do that the others did not do? He spoke directly to God. When the children of Israel were unhappy, what did they do? They whined and they complained to Moses. When Moses was uncertain, what did he do? He turned directly to God, and God answered him. It was Moses who went up into the mountain, into the cloud, and into the mist, while the children of Israel stayed behind. So I ask you, what is it that we can all learn from this? And it may be a little bit different for each one of us. I know for me, I need to learn to be a little more patient. When I don't feel God's presence, to be patient and to know that God is indeed with us. When things are not going the way I want them to go and I'm unhappy, life is hard sometimes. And as I said, just to be a little more patient and more faithful. The other thing that I would really encourage you to do during this ongoing time of pandemic is to be more like Moses. And by that, I mean not telling people what to do, though maybe that is necessary also, but to turn directly to God. So I would ask you to really consider, and this is no surprise coming from me, but what can you do to strengthen your relationship with God and to strengthen your faith? Perhaps you may want to read a chapter of Exodus every day. And as you read, to consider, how am I like the children of Israel? And how can I be more like Moses? What might God be saying to me through this book? If Exodus isn't your thing, perhaps reading a chapter from one of the Gospels each day and make your way through the Gospels. Or some other reading from the Bible. Or perhaps there's just another book that helps you to feel close to God. I personally love spiritual autobiographies. I love to read about other people's experience and relationship with God. Perhaps you'd like to just listen to a piece of music that you find particularly inspiring. For many people, music helps them feel close to God. Maybe you'd like to go for a walk. The weather has been incredibly beautiful this spring, and I know for me it does my heart and soul and body good to get out and just to see the trees and the leaves and the flowers and all of that. Perhaps it would be helpful for you to find a way to help those who have been directly affected by the COVID-19 virus and hurt by this pandemic. Perhaps by sending money to Second Harvest or another organization that is helping people who are hungry or in some way in need. Maybe you can simply call someone who lives by themselves. People that do not have anyone to live with are feeling the days can be very, very long. So I encourage you to reach out to them. Maybe send a card to someone that you wish that you could see or hug, or just simply let somebody know how much you appreciate them. But I invite you to just open up to God. Let God know if you're frustrated, if you're angry, what you are needing. And open your eyes to see how that need may be met, not in its typical or ordinary way, but in a way, and hopefully can deepen your trust that God is indeed with us, even in the midst of this pandemic. And for that I say, thanks be to God, and amen.